Hello, my name is Anita, and I'm going to be talking about what determines where body fat is deposited. I know many of us are wondering why we store fat in some areas as opposed to others, but much of it is determined simply by what gender you are. Body fat may be stored centrally in the internal, visceral, abdominal, and subcutaneous abdominal area, or peripherally in the subcutaneous deposit of the hips, thighs, and arms. Gender determines where fat is stored. Typically, women store fat peripherally in the hips, thighs, and arms, where men tend to store fat centrally in the abdomen. These fat storage patterns most likely evolved to sustain survival. Hence, the classic pear-shaped pattern that we see in lower obesity in women may be due to the female role of childbearing and lactation, and the apple-shaped pattern of upper body obesity that we typically see in men, perhaps needed to quickly mobilize energy for hunting. Lower body fat tends to be broken down a lot more slowly, and therefore it tends to become a lot more permanent and difficult to get rid of. While visceral abdominal fat is much more readily mobilized, although it is a lot less healthy. Lower body fat stores seen in women is also known as gluteofemoral. It's the fat that we see in the hips and the thighs, and it's very difficult to reduce because there's a greater number of adipocytes, although they are smaller. The upper body fat pattern that we see in men was once known as android, and it's easier to reduce because the size of the adipocytes are larger, but there are fewer in number. But once again, these adipocytes tend to be a lot less healthy. Lower body fat deposits are greater in number, smaller in size, and harder to lose, but they're not as metabolically unhealthy as we see in upper body visceral abdominal fat, which is once again larger in size, not larger in number, but also easier to lose and more metabolically dangerous. Intra-abdominal fat has more androgen receptors, which is a male sex steroid hormone, where subcutaneous fat has more estrogen receptors, which is the female sex steroid. Once again, this is why we see more of the subcutaneous fat in women as opposed to the intra-abdominal fat that we see more in men. The intra-abdominal adipocytes have more beta adrenergic receptors, which are also more susceptible to catecholamine. Now, catecholamine levels are increased during exercise, which is why exercise actually effectively shrinks abdominal fat. However, intra-abdominal fat is also sensitive to cortisol, which is a stress hormone. Stress hormone cortisol promotes abdominal fat storage. Lower body adipocytes are rich in alpha adrenergic receptors, making these areas more likely to store fat. Alpha adrenergic receptors also cause proliferation of pre-adipocytes, which is why the number of fat cells are much larger in the gluteofemoral region, making this area more difficult to lose. So hopefully this helps answer some of your questions as to why we store fat where we do. Thank you.